Hello, everyone. This is Harp.
And Maura. And we're back with your Culips English podcast.
Make sure you go to our website, culips.com. That's CULIPS.com, because there you can find all our older episodes and you can become a member. Because when you become a member, we have learning materials with each episode. In the learning materials, you'll find a complete transcript, a detailed explanation, and even a quiz.
And when you're online, check us out on Facebook too.
There's a lot of fun stuff happening on Facebook.
Today we're going to do a Chatterbox episode, and that's where Harp and I chat about all different kinds of topics. Sometimes we talk about cultural things, other times we interview people. It's really a place to chat
about whatever's going on.
Exactly. Now today, the idea for this episode came from one of our listeners. One of our listeners actually emailed us and made a couple suggestions for Chatterbox episodes, and they were pretty good ideas.
Very good ideas.
His first suggestion was to make an episode about learning languages, which is, of course, what we do here, so it makes sense.
So today we're going to talk about our experiences with learning languages.
Right. And then we're going to give you some tips and advice on how to learn a language through our own experiences.
Yep. And we're also going to talk about teaching English and our experiences.
Right. What it's like to teach English.
Don't.
The other side. Okay, so first let's start with our experiences learning other languages. So Harp, I'm going to ask you, what's the first other language that you learned?
Well, English.
Isn't that interesting? How did that work?
Well, my parents are from India, but I was born in Canada. So growing up, we spoke Punjabi at home. And I actually didn't learn English until I was 4 years old, and my older sister went to kindergarten.
Oh, really? So what happened when your sister went to kindergarten?
Well, she started learning English, and when she came home, she would teach me the things that she learned. So I started picking up small little bits, and when I started kindergarten, that's when I started learning English for real.
Wow. Do you have many memories from that time?
I don't really remember kindergarten that much, but I do remember maybe when I was 8 or 9 years old and trying to think in English, but mixing it up with Punjabi. But I've been speaking English for so long that it's hard to remember.
It's so amazing how easily children learn new languages.
For sure. I don't remember it being a struggle.
Yeah. Often kids come from other countries, young children, I mean, and within a relatively short amount of time, they're able to converse very easily in English.
Mm-hmm. It's true. One of my best friends, her niece and nephew live in Beijing, China, and they speak Mandarin, English, and French all fluently.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're 5 years old and 8 years old.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Kids, they learn so easily.
Well, unfortunately, when I was a kid, I didn't learn any languages. I grew up with English-speaking parents, and I really only spoke English.
When did you start learning French?
Well, in case some of the listeners don't know, everywhere in the English-speaking parts of Canada, children learn French in school.
Yes.
Everywhere. Depending on the exact location, the exact province, you might start learning at a different age, but you always learn French. For me, I was in grade 4, which means I think that I was about 9 or 10 years old when I started learning French. What about you, Harp?
I was 12 years old. I remember I was in grade 6, and I think I've mentioned before that I grew up in a really small town up in northern BC, and so my teacher actually didn't speak French at all. So we learned it from books, but she had no idea of the pronunciation of words. It was not an ideal situation.
Wow. You know, that's kind of sad.
It is really sad, and I hope it's better now for kids who are trying to learn in French.
I think it's a bit better. But I also think there are some places in Canada probably where the French teacher doesn't really speak French.
Yeah, because it's hard to get French speakers all across Canada and in Quebec to get English teachers here.
Yep, that's true. My French teacher actually did speak French very well, but she wasn't French and she wasn't from Quebec. She was actually Portuguese, but she had learned French and so she was able to teach it.
Interesting.
But the thing is, even though we start learning French at a relatively young age, most English-speaking Canadians aren't able to speak French.
Definitely. I took French in school from grade 6 to grade 12. So from 12 years old to 17 or 18 years old. I could not speak French when I left school.
Yeah, I studied French at school from, like I said, grade 4 until grade 10, which is not very long, actually. I had a good base. That's one thing that's true. You know how to conjugate verbs like to have and to be, and you can usually talk in the present, past, future, maybe. But to have a real conversation and to actually use French in the real world, forget it.
You know, it's funny because I thought I spoke French when I left school. I thought, okay, I have the basic understanding. I can do this. So when I was 22 and finished university, I went to France to be an au pair. So that's to work as a nanny with a family. And so I got to France and right away, I was like a fish out of water. I didn't understand a word anyone was saying to me. And it took me a good month to be able to understand. But really, it was amazing. I learned so quickly because I was listening to children, and children speak in much simpler sentences, and they're willing to help you learn. So it was an awesome experience.
Yeah, that I think is a good point because often children will just come up to you and talk and they'll wait for you to respond. So they're probably a good place to learn.
Yeah, and they'll actually correct you. In the family, there were 3 kids, and the oldest was a boy, and he was 9 years old. And I remember he corrected my French all the time. And I felt no embarrassment because really, he's just a kid.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, of course, we've mentioned this in past episodes, but we'll mention it again. Harp and I actually met taking a French course in Montreal.
Yeah, we were both here in Montreal and wanted to improve our French. I had, of course, lived in France for a couple months as a nanny, so I'd picked up a lot, and I was pretty fluent, but I wanted to improve and be able to work completely in French. So I took the French class. And where did you learn French if you stopped in grade 10?
Well, I lived in Quebec City, which is a city that's a couple hours from Montreal and much more French than Montreal. So I lived there for a year. I took a class there, and so I had started to get a better understanding, but I still had a lot to learn.
You were pretty immersed too, though, living in Quebec City. It's very French there.
Yes, but I was teaching English. So during the day, I spoke English to all my students and all my colleagues.
Ah, okay, I see.
Right. But you know, that French class was tough. I remember the teacher used to work us to the bone.
For sure. I was working full time and taking evening class 4 nights a week. It was exhausting.
Yeah, it was a very intense class. I think it started around 6 o'clock and went till 10 o'clock at night, 4 times a week.
It was intense.
It was, but I did learn a lot of grammar there, so I'm glad I took it.
I learned so much grammar. I may have forgotten most of it.
Now, we've also had a little bit of experience with other languages, right? How much Korean did you learn when you lived there?
When I was there, I knew a lot. I could not have a basic conversation, but I was teaching English and I was working with kids, so I was able to speak with them, give them commands, and I was able to read Korean because Korean is a very easy language to pick up in terms of the written part of it. But it's still a complicated language.
Oh, yeah. Well, when I lived in Japan, I learned a little bit. I learned some expressions and some words that were important. But to be honest, I had just been trying to learn French for a year, and then I realized how difficult it was to learn a language. And so when I was in Japan, I didn't really immerse myself in Japanese. I just learned a little bit to get by.
Yeah, I learned enough to talk to taxi drivers, shopkeepers, and to the kids at school.
But I do think that Japanese was much easier to understand orally than French because the pronunciation was so much clearer that in French I found it really difficult to understand at the beginning.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised because to people in Canada, Japanese seems so different that most people are surprised to hear that. Okay, so those are some experiences we've had learning languages. Mostly that it's hard and you have to work hard to make progress.
Yeah, definitely. You cannot give up.
That's it. So let's give some more tips. And that's the first one. Don't give up.
Don't give up at all. I know it seems hard and it seems like you'll never be good at it, but that's how I used to feel about French, and now I'm very fluent.
Yes. If it seems too hard, take a break, take a week off, relax, and you might even find you miss it. But it's important to persevere, to continue on studying if you really want to learn.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to make it fun.
Definitely. And that's really one of the reasons why we make this podcast, because most people, including myself, find it really interesting to know about expressions and idioms. So this is a fun way to practice.
Exactly, because these are the expressions that you'll hear on TV or hear on the streets. So it'll make your understanding of English so much more interesting.
Another way to make learning languages fun is to watch movies or TV shows and try to relax while you're doing it.
Definitely. I love watching TV in French. I think it's fun.
Yeah. And you can really learn about the culture that way too, because watching movies from other countries is just such a great way to get to know that culture.
Yeah, definitely.
Something else that I did, which I think helped a lot, was to do a language exchange. Now, it might not always be possible where you live to do it face to face, but you can also try doing it online. Luckily enough, because in Montreal there are a lot of French speakers, there are more French speakers than English speakers. So it was easy for me to meet somebody once a week and practice English for an hour and help them, and then practice French for an hour and practice for myself.
No, this is really good advice. You actually told me the same thing back a couple years ago, and I did it. I loved it. I met a couple really interesting people, and like you said, we spoke for an hour in French and an hour in English, and it was really, really good practice.
Yeah, and you learn more than the language. The first language exchange I did was with a guy named Aziz, and he was from Morocco. So we could talk about the cultural differences between Canada and Morocco, and I could learn about his experience coming over here. And I'm always curious about other places, so I got to ask a lot of questions about Morocco and what life is like over there. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, my first language exchange partner was actually a model. She worked in the industry. She did a lot of catalogs, she did runways, so she was very interesting. She had some very cool stories to tell me.
Yeah, that does sound like fun. Okay, so we say, don't give up, make it fun, meet people, and do a language exchange. Anything else?
If you have the opportunity, do a full immersion like I did with going to France, because when you have no options, you'll start picking it up and you'll start learning.
That's a good point. You kind of have to force yourself to be in a situation where you really have to speak, because so often we feel shy or we think we're going to look stupid, so we hold back. but it's really, really the best advice to just go for it.
Yeah. For me in France, it was sink or swim. I had the opportunity. I had the choice. I was either going to stick it out, learn it, make a fool of myself, or I was going to go home and not know how to speak French.
You know, I always feel so funny giving this advice. And I always give this advice to any friends that are learning, or especially to my students. But, you know, as someone learning French, it's so hard to follow because when I meet new people, I'm shy. And normally I'm not shy. So it's such a weird experience.
I know. I agree with you. I'm not a shy person at all. But when I'm trying to speak French with someone new, it's always, are they laughing at the way I pronounce things? Oh no, are they noticing all my mistakes? But in reality, most people are so encouraging.
Yeah, I know. So that's something else that's a good thing to remember is you might look stupid, but that's it. And you kind of have to accept that. You really have to just say, maybe people are going to think I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm going to make a fool of myself, but I'm going to do it anyways, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because in the end, you'll be better off. You'll know another language.
Right. And learning another language really is such a great experience. I think back to when I only knew English, and I can't believe how much learning French has opened my mind. It's really made me understand how complicated a language is.
For sure. And I think it opens up your eyes to new cultures and other people out there.
Now, let's talk about teaching English. Because like I just said, learning another language is so important. And I think that learning another language, French, and having the experience of learning that language made me a better teacher.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Because then you're able to understand what your student feels like. If you only know English, then it's hard to imagine just how difficult it is to learn a new language.
For sure. And that's why for me, whenever I teach English, I always try to get the student to focus on just speaking. It doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Who cares if you're perfect or not? Just do it. Just go for it. Just say whatever you have in your head.
Whenever I'm teaching English, I always ask people a lot of questions about themselves. Like I might say something simple like, what did you do this weekend? And often students will say, oh, nothing. And I say, nope, you have to tell me. Tell me what you did. And so even if they tell me something simple like, I had lunch and then I watched TV, at least they're practicing. And that's really what I love about teaching is talking with people and getting to know people, especially people who are from different cultures, because I really want to know about different places. Different cultures are so interesting to me, and I always want to learn about them.
Yeah, no, that's true. You know, I loved when I was teaching young kids and they would understand something, or they'd be able to speak one sentence and they would just be so excited and so happy. It was fun for me.
Yeah, I like chatting a lot in classes. And I also like using different kinds of media too, because that's what people like. Watching a movie or listening to a song that people know, because English music is so popular. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people know the song, but they don't really know what the person's singing about. So it's fun to look at that. Although sometimes people get disappointed when they find out that the song is not really about anything that interesting.
That's true. Yeah, I'm definitely not the kind of teacher that teaches from a grammar book. I'm like you. I like to show movies or listen to a song, something interesting, something that's real.
People learn in such different ways as well. So when I'm working one-on-one with people, I always ask them how they want to learn, what they think they need to learn about. Because I think that's really important to know yourself, what you need to do. Mm-hmm. You have to really practice and you have to know what you need to work on.
Definitely.
So it's important to take people's personal interests into consideration too.
Yeah.
Now, when I was teaching in Japan, there were some different techniques that we don't usually use in Canada.
Really? Tell me more.
Well, the one technique I remember is that we used to just say a phrase and the students would repeat the phrase.
That's different.
Yeah, it's very different from the style used in Canada. But that was the style at the time I was there, that maybe for beginners, when they didn't really know how to make a sentence on their own, and the teachers couldn't communicate very well because they didn't speak Japanese, it was a good option to just repeat and try to mimic the sounds.
Yeah, I guess it's a good way to work on pronunciation.
Yeah, and I remember with kids' classes, we used to play music and we used to throw a ball around. Like every time you threw the ball, you said a letter in the alphabet, like A, throw the ball, B, throw the ball. So it was kind of fun.
Yeah, that's true. I taught the kids that I was teaching a lot of songs, a lot of nursery rhymes, and they loved that.
Yeah, you gotta have fun. Mm-hmm. You have to have fun, because if it's all painful and difficult, it's easy to get discouraged and you might not stick with it.
Definitely.
So, on that note, we hope that this podcast is fun for you and that when you listen to it, it doesn't feel like homework.
Yeah, we hope that this is interesting for you and you're learning something.
Right. And remember that even though it might seem difficult, keep at it and you'll just get better and better over time.
Definitely. And just one little tip for getting the most use out of these episodes. If you don't understand everything we're saying, listen one time without the transcript, but then read the transcript and see how much you understood, and then listen one more time. I think you'll really learn a lot.
That's a good point. Listening to the same thing more than once also helps. And if you become a member, then you have the transcript, like Harp said. And if you don't understand some of the expressions that we use, or you're not sure what it means exactly, those explanations are almost always in our learning materials too.
Yeah, exactly.
So, if you haven't become a member yet, think about it.
Do it.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll all keep learning languages together.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.